What if the crime of the century that was visible to the entire world was about to die away into obscurity with barely a whimper? That's pretty much what is about to happen. And this is what I would like to discuss with you to hear your point of view in the comment sections. I'm talking about 9/11, 2001, that fateful day that has been going on now with trials, KSM et al., Khalik Sheikh Mohammed et al., total of 5 gentlemen in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, that is still in the pre-trial stage. I have been not on a whole lot lately, and there is a reason for it. It's kind of like if I continue to come on here to report every single drip of information that happens, people are already tuning everything out because it is going so slow. The movement is so slow. It's like molasses. They very quickly are losing interest because of all the other sensationalism and everything else going out there. But even if this other sensationalism wasn't happening, it's just so slow and mundane. It's not keeping anybody's attention, especially since they're not even talking about things that are really that important, except all of a sudden a tiny little thing will happen and it's almost insignificant. So I have held off for all those little crumbs, and I'm going to be connecting them right now to explain to you how the most evil, wicked crime of the century is about ready to be gone. Nobody's going to be held accountable. And it's such an ingenious, evil, ingenious way of the way they're going about this. It's mind-boggling to me. I wrote a report that is on the C-Vine website. That's c-vine.com, c-vine.com. I will leave that website in the description bar, along with other websites that I happen to mention. Now, keep in mind, again, this is only my opinion. It has not been decided by a court of law. The information I give you are facts that are on transcripts, court transcripts, and I'm just connecting the dots. That's all I'm doing. I'm nobody. I'm not an attorney. I don't have any law background. I'm just a simple, everyday American citizen that's been observing and watching and taking notes for quite some time now, since 2019. Okay. I am going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and go to the C-Vine website and read to you this report. Please, it would be helpful if people would become members of this website. It takes a lot of volunteer hours and overhead to be able to bring to you what we are. That's c-vine.com, c-vine.com. And I am in the military tribunal section. Again, I will be leaving the actual link in the description page below. Please go ahead and like this video and or subscribe, unless you're on this website to become a member. But anyway, we're on social media. This is going to be everywhere. All right. GTMO, will a new plea deal make the 9/11 tribunals go away? Has the terrorist attack on 9/11 been buried under mountains of peripheral news sensationalism over the years where it is no longer important? The pandemic and multiple other diversions seem to overshadow that fateful day. One rarely hears anything about it except maybe on the 9/11 anniversary. It certainly doesn't help with the ongoing pretrial postponements for the last 20 years. In addition, the pretrials are so buried in endless mundane details where they still haven't gone to tribunal. Earlier this year, I had reported my excitement in that the 9/11 trials were finally beginning again in January 2022. This was after a multitude of postponements now for years. And because of the previous years, most recently, is because of the pandemic. But the January pre-trials were canceled again for that entire month. The next scheduled round at that time was in February, were also to be canceled. And then there appeared to be a glimmer of hope in the first week of March 2022, where the pre-trials were to begin again and last until March 26th. But before the scheduled first day could begin, the predictable happened. Additional postponements then happened, but this time in smaller increments. Postponed to March 9th, postponed to March 10th, postponed to March 11th, and then postponed to March 21st. Initially, I was told the reason for the postponements by the gentleman, Ron Fleisvig, from the Office of Military Commissions, was because one of the defense lawyers had a personal problem. And then, but the closed sessions then would continue on in the meantime, which didn't make any sense. On March 11th, another development was released in that the real problem for all the case delays were because defense lawyer Cheryl Borman wanted to quit. Ms. Borman had been the learned counsel on the KSM et al. Case for many, many years. Now, this could be a big problem because if Cheryl Borman chose to quit, all future trials will be postponed for months until they find a new replacement. And then that lawyer will need to familiarize themselves with a very complicated 20-year case of pretrials. What was the reason Ms. Borman chose to quit? This is what's interesting. Because she was being notified that she was under investigation by the Office of Military Commissions for a reason not divulged to the public. The following is a quote from a New York Times report that was written by Carol Rosenberg on what all this meant. She states, "It is ultimately up to the trial judge to decide whether the lawyer, Cheryl Borman, or any defense lawyer can resign. If she is allowed to leave, the judge could be confronted with a conundrum of whether to slow or halt pretrial proceedings until her replacement is hired and brought up to speed. Ms. Borman said she could not ethically represent the prisoner while the investigation was underway and asked that hearings this month be canceled. Instead, the judge, Colonel Matthew N. McCall, has postponed the start of the hearings until March 21st. The judge gave lawyers and prosecutors until next week at that time to file pleadings on whether he should release Ms. Borman from the case. After the learned counsel for another defendant, Ramzi bin al-Shabi, obtained permission to leave the case in 2020 because of a heart condition, the Pentagon took several months to hire, fund, and obtain security clearances for a new lawyer, David J. Brook. Mr. Brook, one of the nation's top capital defenders, said no 5-person capital case had been tried to verdict in the modern history of the death penalty and asked for 30 months to prepare. The request was never ruled upon because the Guantanamo court was closed for more than 500 days because of the coronavirus pandemic. Now, this is the part that's really interesting to me. Previous new counsel in that particular case needed 30 months to prepare. Another 2 years of potential delays before the 9/11 pre-trials could begin again to resume. Be throwing papers in the air. But wait, there's more. Award-winning journalist Carol Rosenberg, and this is the part I want you to pay close attention to, from the New York Times, had left out one small critical detail in her many follow-up reports since the January 2020 proceedings. The small critical detail lacked any of the reasons Judge Shane Cohen, presiding judge of KSM et al. At the time, was strongly considering dismissing the entire 9/11 case out of court. Did you hear that? The January 2020 proceedings contained a laundry list. This was a couple years ago, January 2020. The proceedings contained a laundry list of improprieties over the years from the CIA, FBI during the case. In fact, Judge Cohen's declaration of having to make a very difficult decision about throwing the entire case out of court came in the very last paragraph of the January 2020 open proceeding transcripts. It's documented. These alleged government improprieties were brought out in court at the time by none other than, drumroll, Cheryl Borman and the defense team, which methodically laid out each offense. Many of the improprieties are a matter of public record. Some of the transgressions were reported over the years or brought up in court. Again, that slow drip type of situation, overshadowed by peripheral drama and all the other things that are going on. But for some reason, they seem to continuously be ignored or glossed over through the last 20 years without an investigation. The January 2020 proceedings focused on bringing it all out and placed the entire conglomeration on record in one place. So after the January 2020 proceedings, Judge Cohen then decided to quit, or technically resign, 2 weeks later in February 2020, stating that he had concerns for his family's welfare. This is the same judge less than a year earlier in June of 2019 who had stated he had no plans to retire or transfer and wanted to stay on the case until completion during his voir dire. 3 weeks after Judge Cohen announced his February 2020 departure, GTMO shut down in March 2020 for the next 1.5 years to the bare minimum of essential personnel because of the pandemic that began at the end of that very same January. With all this being said, one has to wonder why in the 11th hour of when the KSM et al. Pretrials have been scheduled now for quite some time, suddenly, after all these postponements that came up, even though they were scheduled, the Omicron variant of COVID came through, so they opened up for like a month or two, and then they had to shut down again. So January 2022 was when they were really going to go again after all these continued on postponements since then. Okay, I know I'm repeating myself here, just trying to make it clear. Suddenly, Cheryl Borman is under investigation when the proceedings were to begin again in earnest. Was this an attempt to discredit the learned counsel because of her damning evidence provided against the government in January of 2020? It does make one speculate. Was Cheryl Borman correct in wanting to quit? In my opinion, she was in a losing position either way. Whether or not her name was eventually cleared, it would color her credibility in the meantime while she was on the defense team. Remember, the new KSM et al. Judge, Colonel Matthew M. McCall, ultimately had the final decision on whether or not to allow any learned counsel to quit or retire. Would he allow this very important defense attorney to quit after continuous pretrial delays, cancels, and reschedules? Well, he most certainly did allow it. And therefore, the remaining scheduled proceedings were canceled as well for the next couple of months. In the meantime, there was never a single mention, update, or ruling on the damning January 2020 pretrial. Now, they can do rulings and these types of things, even when GTMO was, for the most part, shut down. It could still operate behind the scenes, but nothing, not one thing was ever brought up. A huge statement, not a peep. When Judge Cohen suddenly stepped down in February 2020, that issue was never brought up again. As an important side note, Jim Kreindler, the attorney for the victims and family members of 9/11, has been trying for the last 10 years to have the redacted name released of the Saudi official who may very well be the true main conspirator of the 9/11 terrorist attack without any success. Actually, Mr. Kreindler mentions in his video about 11 other Saudi officials that were partially involved at various levels. None have been charged or detained. None of the names released. It continues to be under seal for security reasons. Names redacted out when held under a closed proceeding. Various mainstream media did come out. I guess they had to do a little damage control here because Jim Kreindler is not going down quietly. They did come out with a sensationalized headline with a quote unquote leaked name of the Saudi official. But what they don't mention is this official is way down on the totem pole of the list of importance. Nothing else was ever brought up again because the main name in question, again, is under seal. Remember, he said there were 11 names, and they brought up this one. And everything was just shut up about it after that because people don't keep up with these molasses movements of the trials. I highly recommend at some point you take the time to listen to Jim Kreindler's eye-opening and methodically laid out scenario about everything that's been happening, that's been going on with 9/11. It's going to be quite interesting. He also discusses a little bit about what really was going on with Khashoggi. That's kind of important because, well, I'm just going to leave it at that. I will also leave that in the description page. Okay. So we are now in the middle of July 2022. I'm wrapping this up right here. And the latest evolving story about how the Office of Military Commissions is going to remedy all these delays and address the many unanswered questions, and how they're going to do it, to me, is deeply concerning and disturbing. They have come up with a proverbial brilliant solution, and that is to construct a plea deal, which they are in the negotiation stages as they are right now. So the plea deal involves taking the death penalty off the table if all of the KSM et al. Terrorists plead guilty to the murders of 9/11. They will then be repatriated back to the respective countries to finish out the new sentences of life in prison. But wait, what happens to that explosive statement Judge Cohen made back in January of 2020, where he was strongly considering throwing the entire 9/11 case out of court because of multiple improprieties from the government, the FBI and the CIA? What about the name and or names of the Saudi officials who were the true orchestrators, allegedly, of 9/11? Those are critical questions to be addressed, don't you think? You know what the answer is? When the plea deal is reached, everything else will be wiped off the table as irrelevant. No need to investigate past potential transgressions. Case closed.